All right, so my next question is actually about Jimmy Dore.
Sure.
I want to know what your thoughts are on Jimmy Dore's support. He's basically made Tulsi Gabbard his primary candidate. He doesn't, the way that I would frame his sort of actions towards Bernie, it seems like he harps on Bernie at every chance that he gets to be negative. And, I guess sometimes he does praise him, but it seems like he does more to go after him than praise him. I'm curious what your thoughts are on him, what the factors are of him making Tulsi Gabbard his primary candidate, as well as what your thoughts are on just his constant negative harping of Bernie.
So I think that for the Tulsi Gabbard thing, I think that in his mind, he thinks like Tulsi is the most anti-establishment, and that's why I support Tulsi. And he actually said that to Cenk when he interviewed Cenk recently. He said like, I didn't know how to feel about it for a variety of reasons. But then when I saw how aggressively the establishment was coming after you, I was like, oh, this is an easy choice. I have to support Cenk. And I think that that's, one of the things that flavors his politics more than anything else. And I know that when Bernie decided I'm going to endorse Hillary after the primary and after he basically got it stolen from him, I know that that really bothered Jimmy. And the fact that Tulsi, kind of stepped down from the DNC and chastised them and endorsed Bernie, he thinks that that shows more, balls than it does with what Bernie did. Now, it also is true, by the way, we have to say it. Tulsi also tepidly endorsed Hillary. I mean, she didn't campaign for Hillary like Bernie did, but she tepidly endorsed her and was like, well, obviously she's better than Trump. But I think that's the thing. That's the reason why he supports Tulsi. And also, I think that Jimmy probably just prioritizes foreign policy more than domestic policy. And so he likes it that that's more of her focus than Bernie. Now, as far as him, like the stuff he says that's against Bernie, yeah, I get a little triggered every time I hear him go on a rant that's against Bernie. But what's interesting is, and this just happened recently, everybody was going after him because he said some stuff against Bernie, and then he said some stuff against Pelosi's opponent. And then the next day he was on Twitter and he was like doing like tweet storms that were positive for Bernie. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like it's almost like he heard that backlash and then kind of tried to correct it the next day by saying a bunch of positive stuff about Bernie. So yeah, I mean, listen, obviously I disagree with him. I'm a Bernie Sanders supporter. He's a Tulsi Gabbard supporter. And I just hope that whatever criticisms come towards Bernie's way, I hope they're fair and they're, not over the top in their criticism. And by the same token, I also do hope that the criticisms that go in the other direction against Tulsi, and there are many, I hope that they're also fair and nobody goes over the top with those.
How do you feel about a lot of Tulsi's decision making as of late? Her decision, mainly her decision not to rerun for election in her House seat and to continue her campaign. And do you think her campaign has any realistic hopes of winning this election?
No, I don't think she has a chance of winning at this point. That's not a knock on her as a person. It's just I don't think it's realistic at this point that she's going to win. And what was the other part of the question? Sorry, I missed it.
How do you feel about her claiming
the
that
decision.
she's not going to run for her House
Yeah,
seat?
yeah, yeah. I think that that's because she wants to run for the Senate eventually, the U.S. Senate. And I don't know when the next election in Hawaii is for that. It's either 2020 or no, 2022. So I guess that would give her a few years off or whatever. But yeah, that's my thing. I don't really buy the theory. A lot of people are saying like, oh, she's kind of angling for a Fox News contributor role. I don't think so, because that's not that like prestigious or anything. It's just like, it's a very standard thing. I don't think that you would need to angle for a thing like that at all. If she really wanted to do that, she could probably just ask them and they'd be like, yeah, sure, no problem. So it's not, I don't see angling for that. I just think that she wants to run for Senate. What I will say, I genuinely don't understand is the thing like, oh, I'm definitely staying in until the end. That I don't understand at all. Because what happens if, like, let's even be really kind to her and say like she outperforms her polling numbers in the first states. Okay, let's say she gets like a fourth place in every of the first four contests. Well, then what? It's like, okay, what are you going to do? You're going to get 2% or 3% in every state all the way going to the convention? Because and maybe this is just me, maybe she doesn't think this way, but I would be slightly embarrassed by that. Like, I wouldn't want to run an entire election and do, like, pretty poor in every state, because then, like, what kind of case do you have to make if you want to run again in the future? You're just like, oh, I was soundly rejected by everybody in every state. You know, if you want to stay in for the first 4 and then drop out, I think that would make a hell of a lot more sense. But I will say I also don't like when people, like, I wouldn't tell her what to do, and I wouldn't berate her supporters or Yang supporters or Warren supporters and be like, this is why you have to support Bernie. Because I don't think that works, and I think it actually has the opposite effect. I think that when people who support a candidate hear people, like, telling them, like, you have to support this candidate, I think they're more likely to be turned off by that. And, you know, we could say it shouldn't be like that, but it is like that, I think. So I would never, like, chastise the supporters or anything. I would just hope that she decides on her own volition that after the first 4 states, if she's not popping off, that it's just like, yeah, I'll wrap it up and you know, make decisions from there.
What would be your recommendation for the campaign right now?
For Tulsi?
Yeah.
I mean, I would probably say, hey, you want to stick it out for the first 4 contests and see how you do and then adjust from there? Then go ahead and do that. And if you are in a position where there's an outside chance after the first 4 states, then go ahead and stay in. But if you feel like there's really no path, then I would drop out after the first 4 states.
Okay, so what I wanted to ask you about is I wanted to ask you about Niko House. Now, you've been on his show twice. He's kind of known as, like, I think he's known as an even bigger fan of Tulsi Gabbard than Jimmy Dore is. So that's a pretty high bar. And, you know, he's been doing some pretty questionable things. And so I was just curious what your thoughts are. Do you have any, like, are you going to go on his show again? And, you know, do you think that you're going to sort of lend him your credence again? Is this something worth doing?
Well, I mean, listen, on that question, I'll get, no matter what I do or don't do, I'm going to get crap. Like, there will be people who give me crap for talking to you. And there are definitely people who give me crap for talking to him. But then there would also be people who give me crap for going on TYT and talking to them. So, you know, I just try my best to kind of tune out all the noise and do whatever I think is right. And as a general rule, you know, if a show's big enough and they ask me, then sure, I'll do a little thing here or there with them. Now, as far as like, oh, that lends him my credibility, I don't know about that because, you know, you could even ask him the first time that I went on his channel, we literally debated Bernie versus Tulsi. And, you know, I think it was a pretty substantive conversation. I obviously don't agree with him. He supports Tulsi, and he gave me his reasons why. But I think I made a really good case for Bernie as to why Bernie's the most progressive candidate and why I certainly have more criticisms of Tulsi than I do of Bernie. So, you know, it's one of those things where, funny enough, I and other people who like to try to do what I do on this, it's like we are what Rave Dubin pretends to be. Where Rave Dubin's like, I'm all about the battle of ideas. Like, fight it out in the marketplace of ideas. And it's like, well, that's kind of what we did there. Now, in terms of, like, I'm in a weird position because I'm genuinely friends with Anna Kasparian. She's a really good person, really nice person. She said, you know, we've had nothing but positive interactions. And with Niko, too, it's been like that, though. It's like when we were at Politicon, he was recording one of the events, and he was in the audience, and, you know, me and Tommy Lauren were going back and forth. And then there was one moment where he, like, kind of chimed in and just did, like, the perfect dunking on her that I've ever seen in my life, where even the audience exploded. You know it's a good chime in from the audience when even the audience accepts it and starts laughing. And that's kind of what happened with Niko. I forget what he said. I think he did, like, a callback to when Tommy Lauren was like, well, why don't you just leave the country if you don't, you know, if you don't agree with whatever, kneeling, with putting your hand over your heart for the flag or whatever it was. And then later on in the event, Niko kind of chimed in and was like, why don't you leave the country? And, like, flipped it right back on her, and the audience kind of exploded. And, you know, he interviewed me at Politicon as well. So, but I am in a weird position because, yeah, I do see instances. I don't watch a lot of his stuff, but, you know, I've seen titles of videos about how they think TYT is, like, corrupted or whatever. And I happen to know, because I know everybody over at TYT, that that's just not true. You could, you know, criticize them for making terrible business decisions, which I think is perfectly legitimate. I think it's perfectly legitimate to criticize TYT or anybody else for that matter for taking investment money, as they did. But to say that, oh, that flavors their coverage, then you don't know anything about Cenk and you don't know anything about Anna if you think they're influenced by stuff like that, because it's impossible. They're zebras. You can't tame zebras. You can only tame horses. They're not horses. They're zebras. So anything that they say, I can guarantee you, is coming from a position of that's exactly what they believe. So, I would vehemently disagree with Niko when he tries to say that, oh, they're corrupted and whatever else he might be saying about them. But I am in a weird position because I've had such a good, kind, cordial relationship with Anna, and Niko has also always been very nice to me on a personal level. I just sort of wish that he would reel it in a little bit with the most egregious attacks against TYT. That's not to say he can't disagree with them and he can't make a case for his candidate. He has every right in the world to do that. But I wouldn't cross that line of cross the line into saying stuff that I think is demonstrably untrue about what their beliefs are and why they do what they do.